It began with something small, a gesture, a look, a question. It's odd how the tiniest moments become the loudest reverberations in your mind. You don't notice when it all starts. You only see it when there's no turning back. 9 months have passed since that day. 9 months since my stepson offered his help. And somehow, that help reshaped everything. Before you cast judgment, I ask you to listen. Not to the version of me you might conjure. A selfish woman, a cold wife, the antagonist in some tangled family saga. But to the real me, the woman who was quietly fading within her own home. Let me take you back. The house was still that morning, eerily still. My husband had left for another business trip. I stood in the kitchen, barefoot on chilly tiles, clutching a mug of coffee that had cooled long before I brought it to my lips. Rain fell gently against the window, the kind that doesn't rage or clamour, but lingers, like a memory that clings. That was my life, a lingering echo of what love once felt like. I was alone, not in the physical sense. No, there were others in the house. My husband, his son Luke. Yet I felt like a spectre drifting through my own walls, present but unseen, needed but never truly desired. I'm not saying this to play the victim. I say it because it's a truth too many women carry in silence. You show up, you give, you care. But somewhere along the way, you forget the last time someone looked at you and truly saw you. I used to be a flame. Now I was a candle, flickering faintly in a room no one entered. And then there was Luke. He wasn't just my stepson. He was a quiet presence in the house, the kind of boy who noticed things his father overlooked, things even I had stopped seeing. I still recall the way he looked at me that day. Not in any odd or improper way, but as if he suddenly saw that the person across from him was crumbling. I had dropped something in the garage, a heavy box of Christmas decorations stashed in a corner I hadn't touched in months. It slipped from my grasp and I cried out, not from pain, but from sheer exhaustion, the kind of cry that says, I can't keep going. I thought no one heard, but he did. Luke was there. Without a word, he walked over and gathered everything up. He looked at me and said, You don't have to do this by yourself, you know. Those words broke something inside me, not because they were romantic or grand, but because they were real. When you're starved for affection, kindness feels perilous. It seeps into you and lingers. I didn't fall in love with my stepson. This isn't that kind of story. But I began to feel again, and that was enough to change everything. I didn't see it then, but that simple moment, his help, his presence, his noticing me, was the spark that ignited a fire I'd been trying so hard to extinguish. That fire would go on to consume everything I thought I had mastered. So before you judge, walk with me through what happened. Understand the void I was living in, the slow erosion of love, the quiet ache of being needed, but never held. Sometimes the most unexpected help doesn't come to mend you. Sometimes it comes to show you just how broken you've been all along. Subscribe now to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, where we unearth the stories no one dares to voice, where hearts don't just beat, they break, and sometimes they awaken. I tried. I truly did. I tried to be the wife he needed, the woman this house demanded, dependable, steady, silent. I cleaned, I cooked, I smiled when it was expected, laughed when it was polite, nodded when I wanted to scream. Until one day I no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. She resembled me. Same eyes, same skin, same hands, but her eyes were dull, her mouth weary, her hands always busy but never held. The house was beautiful, you know. High ceilings, wide windows, crisp white walls, hardwood floors that echoed when you walked alone at night. It had everything except warmth. It was the kind of home people envy from the outside, but inside, it was cold, not from the air, but from the silence. My husband Mark was always gone. Work, he said, late meetings, weekend flights. He'd call sometimes say, "Hey, just checking in." but even over the phone, his voice felt distant. We used to be something, before the schedules, before the distance. Now he kissed me like it was routine, touched me like it was a task, spoke to me like I was a colleague, not a partner. I began counting the days we went without a real conversation. Some weeks we only spoke about groceries or bills. And then there was Luke, 19, quiet, always with headphones around his neck and a book under his arm. He wasn't mine. He was from Mark's first marriage, moved in with us after his mother remarried, and things grew complicated there. At first, we hardly spoke. He kept to himself, stayed in his room, emerged for meals, then vanished again. But over time, I noticed him noticing. He watched me without saying much, as if he saw something no one else bothered to look for. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe he just pitied me. Or maybe he was just quiet like that. But it mattered, because in a house where I felt like furniture, being seen, even for a moment, felt like air rushing into my lungs after being submerged too long. I remember once catching him watching me cook. Not in a strange way, just observing. His eyes weren't filled with judgment. They were soft, curious, as if he was trying to understand something about me I hadn't yet grasped. And that scared me, because no one had looked at me like that in years. Not Mark, not anyone. As time passed, the walls of that house began to shift, not physically but emotionally. I started to feel something unfamiliar, a presence, a warmth, not from my husband, but from someone who had no idea he was becoming part of my quiet unraveling. Luke wasn't loud, he didn't command a room, but he had a way of being there, present, still, safe, in a home so emotionally barren that stillness felt like solace. I didn't realize how much I needed it, not until the silence between us began to feel like understanding, not avoidance. I thought I was managing. I thought I had everything under control. But we always think that until something, or someone, reveals just how much we've been missing. It happened on a Saturday, one of those overcast afternoons where the sky just lingers, not quite raining, not quite clear. Mark was gone again, some client meeting in another city. He left early, as always, with the same hurried kiss on the cheek, the same half-hearted take care of yourself, like I was a plant left behind needing only water and light. I'd been avoiding the garage, too many boxes, too many memories, old holiday decorations, college textbooks, dusty containers labelled miscellaneous. I just wanted to clear a little space, something small to make me feel useful. I reached too far, lifted too much, and a sharp jolt shot through my wrist. I dropped the box and it crashed to the ground with a heavy thud. Ornaments scattered across the concrete like shattered promises. I gasped. Not from pain, but from frustration. I leaned against the wall, clutching my wrist, eyes stinging with tears I refused to let fall. I didn't expect anyone to come. No one ever did. But then I heard footsteps. Luke. He must have heard the crash from inside. He walked in without knocking, his eyes scanning the mess, then settling on me. For a moment, he just stood there. Not in shock, not in judgment, just aware. He approached slowly, as if not to startle me, knelt beside me without a word, his hand brushing mine as he checked my swelling wrist. "Are you okay?" he asked. It wasn't the words, it was how he said them, like the question truly mattered, like I mattered. I nodded, too embarrassed to speak, but something in me cracked open right then. Because in that moment, kneeling in the cold garage with a 19-year-old boy looking at me like I was worth protecting, I realized how long it had been since anyone had looked at me like that, since anyone had asked how I was. And meant it. Luke helped me up, one hand steadying my back, the other careful around my wrist. He didn't ask for permission, he just helped. He brought me inside, sat me at the kitchen table, wrapped my wrist with a soft cloth and an ice pack from the freezer. I watched him move around the kitchen like he knew the space, like he'd already mapped out what I needed. It felt strange, familiar, and kind. Too kind. Later that evening, I tried to brush it off. Told myself it was just a sweet moment, nothing more, just a boy being decent. But it lingered. the way his fingers hovered just long enough to feel deliberate, the way he looked at me like I wasn't just someone's wife, someone's burden, but a person. That night, lying in bed alone, I replayed the sound of his voice, that simple question. Are you okay? The ache in my chest wasn't from the sprain, it was from something deeper, something I'd locked away for years and forgotten how to name. That was when I realized something dangerous. I hadn't been touched with care in years. I told myself it was nothing, that Luke was just being kind, that he was only helping because he felt obligated. That's what good sons do, right? I clung to that thought like a lifeline, repeating to myself, he's just kind. That's all it is. That's all it can ever be. But small things began to grow, little moments you could almost ignore if you weren't so desperate to feel alive. It started with the way he helped me into my coat one morning. A simple gesture, but the way his fingers brushed my shoulders, lingering a second too long, sent a ripple through me so strong I had to step away and pretend I needed to find my keys. Then there was the tea. One evening, I came downstairs and found a cup waiting on the counter, steam rising, honey swirled in just the way I liked it. No words, no note, just there. I hadn't told him how I took my tea, but somehow he knew. Another morning I woke up late, exhausted, my wrist aching, my heart heavier than I could bear. When I shuffled into the kitchen, there he was, buttering toast, not for himself, for me, lightly browned, no crusts, just the way I've always made it for myself, back when someone caring enough to do it for me was just a dream. He looked up, smiled shyly, and slid the plate across the counter. Didn't say a word. Didn't need to. It was in the way he noticed, the way he paid attention to things no one else saw. And somewhere deep inside, something began to whisper. He sees you. Not as his father's wife, but as a woman. I shook my head, fought it, pushed the thoughts down so hard they made my chest ache. Because I knew it was wrong. I knew it. But wrongness has a way of slipping through the cracks when you've been starved for softness for so long, when every touch you once knew has turned mechanical, when every word that once made you blush now sounds like paperwork, when you ache for something you can't even name anymore. I'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every small moment from the day, the brush of his hand, the way he stood a little too close when he handed me something, the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. Each memory felt like a drop of water wearing away the stone walls I'd built around myself for years. I hated myself for noticing. I hated the way my heart raced when I heard his footsteps in the hallway, the way I caught myself smoothing my hair, checking my reflection, wondering if he'd notice me today the way he did yesterday. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust. It was something I couldn't neatly box and explain away. It was hunger. A hunger for connection, for warmth, for someone to look at me and not see a chore, a responsibility, or a forgotten wife tucked between business trips. It was dangerous, and I knew it. Yet, I stayed close to the flame, pretending I didn't notice how warm it was, how good it felt, how easily it could burn everything down. Nothing had happened. Not really. No lines crossed, no words spoken, no promises made. But everything had changed. I was suddenly aware of every breath I took near him, every brush of air between us, every second of silence that now felt charged with something unspoken. We started spending more time together, always under the guise of casual things. He'd join me in the living room while I folded laundry, sit at the kitchen counter while I cooked, ask if I needed help with groceries, fixing the lamp or watering the plants. Always helpful, always present, always kind. And I let him. Because kindness felt good, because company felt better than the echo of my own thoughts, because pretending this was innocent was easier than admitting what was unfolding. One afternoon I was sitting on the edge of the couch, legs tucked beneath me, trying to rub the ache from my wrist again. I winced. Luke walked in, noticed, and sat beside me. Close. Not too close, but close enough that I felt the heat of him. "You really should rest that hand," he said, almost teasing. Then smiled. He reached for the nail polish I'd left on the table from the night before, held it up with a raised eyebrow. I laughed. "Go on then," I said, half joking, half hoping he wouldn't. but he did. He took my foot gently in his hand and started painting, clumsy strokes, tongue between his teeth in mock concentration. We laughed at first, light and easy, but then the laughter faded and the room grew still. He finished the last toe, looked up at me. I looked down at him, and suddenly there was nothing left to say, just a long, charged silence thick with everything neither of us could voice. He let go of my foot slowly. His fingertips brushed my ankle barely, but it sent something through me I couldn't name. Later that evening, we sat on the couch again, closer this time. The movie on the screen was just background noise. I wasn't watching, and neither was he. I noticed a piece of lint on his shirt, reached over to brush it off, and lingered. My fingers stayed too long, rested flat against his chest for a breath too long. He didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at me, and I looked back. No one said a word, but the air between us was loud. After that, I started dressing differently, not overtly, just more deliberately. A touch of lipstick, a softer blouse, a perfume I hadn't worn in years. I told myself it was nothing, just wanting to feel good in my skin again, but I knew the truth. I only reached for that perfume on days I knew Luke would be home. I noticed him noticing, the way his eyes lingered when I entered a room, the way he stood a little straighter, the way his voice softened when he said my name. We danced in a space neither of us dared to define, a quiet rhythm of glances, nearness, and unspoken feelings. Then one night, he knocked on my door. Soft, 3 taps. Not urgent, just steady. I froze, heart in my throat, breath caught, fingers gripping the edge of my blanket, knuckles white. I didn't answer right away because everything I'd been trying to silence, every feeling I'd pushed down, every thought I'd denied, every ache I'd buried, came rushing to the surface. I knew nothing after that moment would be the same. That night, something in me shattered. I don't know what finally tipped it over the edge. Maybe the silence in the house, maybe the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the hallway, maybe the weight of all the things I hadn't said, hadn't let myself feel. But I fell apart, alone in my room, curled on the edge of the bed. I let it come. The tears, the ache, the kind of crying that feels like your body is wringing grief from your bones. Silent, just shaking, breath catching. The kind of sorrow you can't explain because it's been building for years. I pressed my face into the pillow, told myself to pull it together, but I couldn't. I didn't hear him come in. The door opened softly, and there he was. Luke. He stood there a moment, silent, watching me in the dark, his silhouette framed by the faint hallway light. I didn't tell him to leave. I didn't have the strength. He walked in slowly, sat beside me on the bed. Not too close, just enough to make his presence felt. Then, without a word, he reached for me. I didn't resist. I leaned into him like I was collapsing into a memory that was never mine to hold. His arms came around me, strong yet trembling. He didn't try to fix it. Didn't ask what was wrong, he just held me, and I held on longer than I should have, my face pressed into his shoulder, my hands clutching his shirt, his heartbeat loud in my ear. It should have felt wrong, but in that moment it felt like the safest place in the world. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Minutes, hours, time blurred. Eventually I pulled back just enough to look at him. Our faces were close, too close, breath mingling, eyes locked, his hands still resting gently on my arm. There was a pause, that thin, breathless moment before a decision is made. A heartbeat from something irreversible. He looked at me like he was searching for permission, like he was holding back everything he wasn't supposed to feel. Then his fingers reached up, hesitant, and brushed a tear from my cheek. His hand lingered, trembling, warm. That was the moment. Not a kiss, not a confession, just a touch that said everything we couldn't. I pulled away, barely, just enough to reclaim the distance we'd crossed without realizing. He didn't chase, didn't speak, neither did I. But we both knew. Whatever we'd been pretending, whatever lines we thought still held, they were gone. We hadn't crossed the line, but the line no longer existed. After that night, we avoided each other. Not out of anger or shame, but because we didn't know how to exist in the same space anymore without feeling the weight of what almost happened, of what already had. The house felt colder, not from the temperature, but from something shifting between the walls. A silence settled, not empty but heavy with the unsaid. I started walking softer, closing doors quieter, as if sound might betray what had bloomed in the dark. Luke kept his distance. No more sitting in the kitchen while I cooked, no more lingering in the hallway, no more asking how I was. I missed it, and hated myself for missing it. Then Mark came home, suitcase in one hand, phone in the other, dropped his bags by the door, kissed the top of my head without looking at me, and asked what was for dinner. Just like that, as if everything was normal, as if time had frozen while he was gone, as if I hadn't been unraveling in his absence. He didn't notice the stiffness in my smile, the way my eyes darted to the hallway at every sound of footsteps, the shift in the air around us. He was as oblivious as ever, wrapped in spreadsheets, deadlines, hotel breakfasts. Luke became a shadow, quick hellos, quieter goodbyes, avoiding eye contact, making himself smaller. I saw it in how he barely entered a room anymore, how he stopped laughing at my silly jokes, how he left dishes in the sink instead of waiting for me to wash them like it had once been our unspoken ritual. I tried to convince myself this was better, that distance was what we needed, but it felt like living beside an open wound. One morning, I came downstairs early, still in my robe, hair a mess, just craving 5 quiet minutes with a coffee before the day began. That's when I saw it, a small folded note on the kitchen counter. My name wasn't on it, but I knew it was for me. His handwriting. 5 words. I'm moving in with Mum. My hands shook. I stood there staring, as if the words might rearrange into something else, something that didn't feel like loss. I reached for my coffee mug, but my fingers missed the handle. It slipped, shattered across the tile floor. The sound echoed through the kitchen, sharp, sudden, final. In that moment, it wasn't just glass that broke. It was the last thread of something I hadn't even known I was clinging to, a connection, a presence, a warmth I hadn't dared to name. Gone, just like that. No goodbye, no confrontation, just silence and the quiet crack of my heart. After Luke left, the house slipped back into its old rhythm. Quiet, structured, routine. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like an abandoned stage, like something vital had ended but the curtains hadn't closed. Mark moved through the days as if nothing had shifted, sipping coffee, reading emails at the kitchen table, kissing my cheek before leaving, never noticing the silence in me that grew heavier by the hour. But I noticed, and I couldn't stop noticing. The spaces where Luke had been felt louder than anything else. The chair he used to sit in, the faint smell of his shampoo in the upstairs bathroom, the closed door to his bedroom like a sealed confession I couldn't open. I started staying up late long after Mark was asleep. The house would grow still and I'd sit at the dining room table with a blank notebook writing. At first, it was scattered thoughts, fragments of emotions I couldn't voice. But slowly, it became more. A journal. A confession, a quiet space to retrace how it all unfolded, how something that began with kindness grew into something I still can't name. I wrote about the garage, the tea, the toast, the silence after he painted my toenails, the sound of his breath that night he held me. I wrote because I needed to understand, because I didn't know who I was anymore. I started questioning everything, my marriage, my purpose, my worth. Had I failed as a wife? Had I waited too long for Mark to see me again? Had I let myself become invisible? Or had I crossed some inner boundary long before Luke ever knocked on that door? I thought about telling Mark more than once. I'd lie beside him at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to him breathe, wondering if he'd even care. If I told him everything, would he be angry, hurt, or worse? Would he shrug and say he understood, that he saw it coming, that he knew he'd lost me long ago and didn't have the strength to look for me? But I never told him. Not because I feared the fallout, but because I didn't know what I'd be confessing to. What had I done, really? Nothing physical, no kiss, no betrayal in the technical sense. Yet I'd given something of myself to Luke, something fragile, something real, and now it was gone. I wondered if he hated me, if I'd ruined something in him, tainted his ability to trust, to feel safe. I wondered if he looked back on it with shame, the way I sometimes did when I couldn't sleep. But then I'd remember that night, the way he touched my face, not with desire or hesitation, but with care, with reverence, like he was protecting something in me no one else had seen. I replayed it over and over, not because I missed the moment, but because it was the first time in so long that I'd felt held, not just physically, but emotionally, completely. I wish I could say I found clarity, some tidy conclusion, a ribbon to tie around this mess and call it a lesson. But some stories don't end in closure. They echo, like unanswered prayers in the dark. Have you ever been saved by someone you weren't supposed to need? Not in a dramatic world-stopping way, but in quiet moments, a glance that felt like shelter, a voice that softened something brittle inside you, a kindness that reached a part of you untouched for years. Have you ever crossed a line without realizing you'd taken the first step? Not because you were reckless or cruel, but because you were tired, because your heart had been empty so long you forgot what it meant to feel full? I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't seek it out, but it found me in the form of a boy I helped raise, who one day saw me not as the one who cooked his meals or folded his laundry, but as a woman, alone, hurting, human. Now I live with that, with the echo of everything almost said, with the weight of every silent moment we shared, with the ache of what I had to let go of before I ever held it. So tell me, was I a villain or just a woman searching for something gentle in a world grown cold? Tell me in the comments. Tell me if you've stood at the edge of a line you didn't know existed until it was too late. If stories like this stir something deep inside you, if they make you feel seen or less alone, please like this video and subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold. We don't just tell stories, we unwrap the hidden corners of the human heart, the ones most are too afraid to touch. Desire doesn't always look like temptation. Sometimes it looks like help, like kindness, like someone finally noticing you exist. But even a gentle hand can leave a scar. If you're lonely, if you're fading in silence, if your days are filled with going through the motions and pretending it's enough, speak. Reach out. Tell someone. Because not every second chance is a blessing, and not every helping hand leads you home. Some just show you how far you've drifted from yourself.